Hi there, this is Dr. Randy Bock. Today's November 9, 2022, and I'm here with you for a viral conversation, a coronavirus conversation, maybe a Zika conversation. Um, we'll see. Uh, I am going to have a guest later this week, um, so I'm probably going to do a shorter session today. I've got a few things going. I'm um, writing an article about Zika, hopefully a good summary article that's accessible to the people, because Zika is forgotten. It was the big pandemic in its time, so long ago, like 6 years ago, 2015 to 2016. It was the um, biggest medical news item in the world at the time, and one of the top 5 news items in general, and certainly affected millions of people in many different ways. Probably, some of the damage from Zika you don't really see, um, because it's kind of a presence of an absence. It's a non-existence of kind of a vacuum. About probably 150,000 people in Brazil don't exist right now because of the fear from microcephaly. I think it was an unfounded fear. That is to say that if you look at the birth rate that would have been, and then in the Zika year and the subsequent year, that went down significantly. So probably about 100,000 lives just never came into being. Um, and this is a very, very unlikely actual disease connection between Zika and the congenital infection that would bring microcephaly. And how do we know it's unlikely? Because it has never recurred anywhere else on Earth, including Northeast Brazil, where it was in 2015, supposedly. So I'm trying to write a summary article. I've been published lately in the Daily Skeptic, which I recommend you look at. I've got 2 articles up, and maybe I can show one of them to you. Um, uh, and I might get it in the air. I might be able to get it in someplace else. I don't want to, count my chickens and so forth. But so what do I have for you today? Well, here's my election aftermath. Um, it was probably not what people expected. It's probably a mediocre result from whichever side you're looking. But one of my favorite um, kind of cynical voices from the early 20th century is H.L. Mencken, and democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. So you can take that for what you will for the election. I'm probably not going to do much more about the election right now. That's probably better covered elsewhere. But one thing I've got a couple things going, and maybe I'll share with you the article I'm working on uh, regarding Zika, and maybe as well, I'll show you the thing that I'm kind of a little bit happy with. It's the Zika comic book. Let me see if I can get it up, and I'll pop it on the screen and do course here. Having multiple windows not necessarily helpful. So here's the Zika comic book, and let me just pop it up, get it on our video screen. Here we go. So I've spent a fair amount of time on this over the last 6-8 months. Why have a Zika comic book? Well, because people don't necessarily read medical articles. I got an article in the American Journal of Medicine about investigating the Zika microcephaly crash, the fact that it was a pandemic, but it was predicted to carry on year after year after year. Unlike SARS-CoV-2, this was going to be give a persistent problem without immunity. Because dengue, which Zika is pretty much the same as dengue comes year after year after year, and people just get it, and they don't seem to build up much herd immunity in Brazil and other tropical places where they get dengue. And so there were predictions there were going to be 1 million extra cases of microcephaly per year. And the world, has I think how many births per year? Pretty much it's like one at any given moment. The country probably per year. Let's see, think the United States has about 3 million births per year. It's about 1% of the population gives birth every year. So if there's 7 billion people on Earth, approximately, that would be 70 million births per year. So 1 million extra microcephaly births per year is a significant amount. That's, it's 1 in 70. That's like 3% of the population. To me, 1 in 70 be 1.4% of the population. Ordinarily, microcephaly is about 1 in 1,000. So that would be, um, 10 times more, or maybe, depending how you look at it, 50 times more, so forth, depending how you use your standard. Because people say it's, anywhere between 1 in 5,000, 1 in 1,000, so forth. But it'd be a significant number of microcephalic births per year. And each one of those would have attendant intellectual deficit have to be cared for long periods of time thereafter. So this is a huge burden. This never happened, though. So the comic book is not factual. It deals with facts in a sense, and maybe we'll just kind of get into it. So the truth about Zika, and again, the intended audience here is probably more not just the academic part, not necessarily people who are watching this video, but for kind of regular people, people who are doing the morning commute, housewives, mothers, people who are not necessarily used to sifting through medical journals or buying a book about Zika and so forth, or reading entire nonfiction works and so forth, being able to evaluate those things. So it's not shooting low, it's not shooting high. Anyway, you tell me. So this is the truth about Zika. Here's the first panel, Salvador, 2015. And I really have to say I love the drawings. I didn't do any of these. I did the blurbs, and they're a little bit preachy. I mean, they're kind of it's not an action comic. It's not Batman and so forth. How's work? My boss is a jerk, treats the public like fools, and so TV. There's a worrying increase in the cases of microcephaly in babies. So he's munching away. Weird. We're working on the Zika story in the research lab, but we're far from done. So fortunately, our characters involved with Zika. What do you mean, Adriana? Are you releasing this news without proof? The next day, he's at work. He happens to work at a newspaper. So these characters are not random. I want to suggest an agenda. Are the new cases of microcephaly really related to the Zika virus? Go on, Roberto. Everyone talks as if this link is certain, but researchers aren't sure. Several newspapers have been talking about it. I think we should adopt a more scientific point of view, Donald. We should inform the public that until these doctors show comparison data of the frequency of microcephaly births from the past, it's not possible to claim this relationship. We can interview the researchers. Okay, Robert, that's enough. This is not the kind of headline we want. This scientific posturing is boring. Nobody wants to read this. But Donald, people need to know the truth. This kind of story can cause mass hysteria. Scientific debate doesn't sell newspapers. Keep in mind, sensationalism is what pays your salary, Roberto. Well, again, this is not necessarily real life. I mean, he's young. He's got a pregnant wife. He resigns sometime later. Whoever's pregnant has to use repellent, eat garlic, so the mosquitoes don't bite. But the mosquito only bites during the day. Did you know that there's no evidence that Zika causes microcephaly in babies? But the newspaper said yes. If it's said in the newspaper, it's true. And so he kind of goes on here. It's up to me. Is it up to me, this guy in the restaurants, to do everything around here? And he's kind of does the same thing. What if I inform these people myself? And this is kind of the me role. This is something I've been doing. So he starts a blog. He's a journalist. He'd like to interview a guy and so forth. Anyway, this is home scene. And I'm probably not going to do this word for word for the rest of this, but you get the basic idea. He's trying to set up a blog, and then lo and behold, he gets to meet somebody from her lab, a colleague of hers who's studying the Zika virus. And so they wind up, meeting cafeteria, and he wants to talk about the situation. And she's got some interesting thoughts on the topic. Anyway, this goes on, and they kind of pass some of those little facts. Bahia, Brazil, April 2015, mild rash and fever were attributed to Zika without any prior human illness or sightings in the America. This became a thing all of a sudden. Anyway, they go on and they talk about some of the stuff that was happening Anyway, so I'm not going to, I don't think I have the patience to read all of this, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it. Maybe I'll zip out of here for a second. So I'm excited about that. That's maybe too personal, but TMI for some of you. But if you want to see a copy of it, let me know. Send me an email, and I'll give you sharing rights to take a look at it. If you have any suggestions about where to, put it, or how to get it published and so forth, that'd be nice. I'm looking for advice. I have a Spanish version and a Portuguese version as well, pretty much the same thing, and this goes on for 28 pages. Maybe I'll share with you a little bit. I'm going to take a slight detour. I was on a phone call just now with a friend of mine who lives in Malaysia, and he he's not medical, but he was saying, how careful everybody is there, and everyone's masked all the time. And he and his wife, they're both young, they're probably in their 30s, have been wearing masks. They don't go indoors unless they're wearing a mask. She's a school teacher. She wears a mask. She has young kids, I think first graders or something like that. They've got two young kids at home, and the kids have been a little bit, spazzing out because they had, taken away from school for so long prior. And I told him, I said, I don't think you really need to be doing any of that. And people need to move on. So, I have had this article. It's now a little over a month old. Probably some of you have seen it. And I think, anybody who watches here should, frankly, share this article. It's not just because it's mine, but is it time to accept that Omicron is not COVID-19? I was at the American. I was peripherally at the American Public Health Association meeting the other day, and I'm going to show you maybe a couple pictures here if I can get them up. So yeah, so let's see. So these are all public health. These are probably nurses and some doctors and public health officials, maybe PhDs and master's degrees, and who knows. This is the escalator at the hotel adjacent to the American Public Health Association meeting. It's pretty, stark totem pole approach, but I like the kind of the formality of this. Lo and behold, a lot of them are heading, to shop and so forth, coffee in hand. And where are they gravitating to? A lot of them are gravitating to Starbucks. And so I don't know what's going on in their minds. I mean, this is not social distancing, obviously, anymore. The people in Starbucks themselves are not wearing masks. A lot of these people aren't wearing masks. But this I think the age group here averages, probably, I don't know, going to guess, 35 to 40 years old. You tell me. People are wearing masks. They're in their public health, and I don't necessarily all, let's assume they're all healthy. But this is kind of rather nonsensical. I don't think this helps social interactions. This is, a conversation going on at the hotel. I don't know. Call me crazy, but I think visual cues are hugely important for people. And these are the leaders, ostensibly, of our public health policy. And this is where they are mentally. I had a conversation with one of the participants. She worked for the APHA, and she's, was operating a desk there. And I was walking by, and she's, wanted to know if she could help me. And we had a brief conversation. And she's masked up. She's young. She's probably 28 or so. I said, "Well, no, you can. No, I'm fine. I wasn't actually at the conference. I was meeting somebody who had been at the conference, an old professor of mine, and I said, well, I just said, how long are you going to wear that mask?" And we got into the mask conversation. I've had this conversation, and I'm not sure the right way to do it because we don't like to be rude ordinarily, but. I said, well, I had the conversation with a guy at the counter at Staples. This is probably now a year ago. And he's wearing a mask. He's young. He's 22 or something. And I said, why are you wearing the mask? He said, I don't know. I'm told to wear the mask. I said, well, you're going to be wearing it 5 years from now? And he said, no. Are you crazy? So well, how about 2 years from now? He's like, no way. I'm not going to wear this 2 years now. Well, I said, so what's going to happen between now and 2 years from now that's going to make you, decide that the time is right to take this off? And he kind of was puzzled about it and said, I don't know. Well, if you're in that category, then carry on wearing a mask. I'm not sure what the American Public Health Association waiting for. People fear COVID. Even I think we have this kind of irrational side. I was speaking with a relative who follows us here, and she's on board with all the concepts, and she's very intelligent, so forth. But when you get sick yourself, you're like, oh my God, did I do the wrong things? Am I going to die from the COVID illness? And the thing's long gone. Humans change, viruses change, we change immunologically, maybe not mentally. But there is no more SARS-CoV-2. It's gone. And maybe somebody's working on a lab and so forth and release it, or inadvertently or inadvertently down the road. But it's not around anymore. We've got fully immune to it one way or another, either, herd immunity, natural immunity, or vaccine. But that's not coming back. So the severe version is not coming back. And the one we have right now is equivalent to a cold. And really, you got to get on with your life. And I just don't, I've said this before, I don't really get it, but most people in public health that I know are complete, we'll say, cautious maskers, and they're wearing the mask everywhere, making their kids do it as well. I've seen it at Halloween. I've seen it anyway. So I don't want to blather on about that too much, but you have to kind of be the change, as Mr. Obama said. We are the change we've been waiting for. Well, you have to be the change, and you have to, come out with a way to phrase it with people that they can, change things. Again, I think my article, it's mine, and I don't want to, say that I have the answers to everything, but I think it's a very, very helpful article to frame things. I don't think people realize that Omicron is not, if this is, I don't know, Earth, or maybe, I don't know, maybe this is the sun, SARS-CoV-2. These are the middle planets, Venus, Mars. Those are the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, kappa strains and so forth. Omicron is Pluto. It's in its own little thing. It's not the same thing as the other ones. If this is, anyway, maybe that's a bad example. Genomically, it is not part of the family tree. This is not my work. I am quoting. I'm a Hodcroft of next strain, and you can read the articles and her own comment, and it's an orphan. And Dr. David Aronoff says Omicron may have picked up some genetic material from a cousin of common cold-causing coronavirus, which is what coronaviruses always have been. So again, I've been over this article, but I do think it's a very, very reasonable thing to give to people who are still, COVID frightened. It is just not a thing. And again, I know a lot of people are getting the newest vaccine. I think that one should steer away from that. It's basically got a combination of two things, the ancestral version, which is long gone, and the Omicron, which is not dangerous. The old version just kept in there so they can keep it on the Emergency Use Act. So my last two paragraphs, well, here, so long as the operative disease or virus term remains COVID-19, the EUA liability reduction, pharmaceutical company enrichment, and political leverage remain. H.L. Mencken again, cynic, and I guess my favorite, I quoted him here, the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. Or in English, basically, if they keep you scared, you're more easily manipulated, and you're not going to notice the problems that they bring on themselves, or their own infirmities and deficiencies. And so whether governments had a valid reason to bring fear in 2020 is arguable. There's no real reason in 2022 or 23 or whatever. The EUA, as the gift that keeps on giving, prevents any turning of the page from COVID-19 to Corona 22 or some other rational resolution. There's no reasonable or legitimate public safety purpose to behave as if COVID-19 is still the major threat in 2022. nor that COVID-19 vaccine is still necessary. Moreover, the incipient bivalent Omicron vaccine fulfills no genuine patient need. Historically, the common cold has never been pre-vaccinated. Vaccinating after the fact, since most of us have had Omicron, has minimal positive and potential negative effects, and the COVID-19 portion has no medicinal, only legal purpose for existing as a second ingredient. So there you have it. That's the words of me. And take it for what it is. But that's what I believe. So I think the article is it's got a fair amount of coverage, a lot of comments, so forth. I think you should look at it, share it, give it to your relatives who claim they have COVID-19 or get tested for COVID at this point in time. This is way after the fact. So let's see if I can come up with anything else that's reasonable, intelligible in the meanwhile. So I'm kind of not doing a gross news coverage here. Maybe I'll get your thoughts on, I'm writing the Zika article I'm writing, which is kind of a summary article. Maybe, I don't know if I'm going to, bore you intensely by going over it. Let's see. So, yeah, this is probably a little too dense to go over, but basically, this is a summary. If you want to read this, I can send it to you and you can comment on it and so forth. But the essence is that, in 2015, there was a viral pandemic in Northeast Brazil, Zika, and then it was, became a big issue. I mean, Zika had never caused a single human illness in its first 60 years or so, as far as anybody could tell. It probably never has since then as well. And Zika is basically, there are 4 dengue. Zika is basically dengue number 5, but it's probably the monkey version, and maybe it gets monkey sick, but never humans. But it became a reasonable vehicle for kind of making careers in medicine and bringing kind of social change and social justice to Northeast Brazil. So just kind of skipping around here, there were, in 2014, prior to Zika even be announced, there were 2 physicians in Northeast Brazil, Recife and Natal, who formed a group with the express purpose of finding a brand new virus within Brazil. The discovery of which would address Brazil's south-north societal inequities by bringing money and attention to Brazil's poorer equatorial areas. They called it CHIK-V, the mission, referencing both chikungunya, that's the CHIK-V part, an African virus which didn't deign to accommodate them ultimately because it didn't show up in Brazil. And the 1986 Robert De Niro, Jeremy Irons movie, The Mission, in which the anti-establishment heroes of these 2 doctors, the Jesuit priests, they kind of rectified the ills, or tried to rectify the ills of European colonialism brought upon the indigenous South American tribes. So they had an idea in advance of Zika ever showing up. They wanted a virus to be in Northeast Brazil, so that Northeast Brazil could get money and attention that they weren't otherwise getting. That's weird. I'm sorry. That's not the way you should really do science. It's not. I understand that politics is politics, but medicine shouldn't be politics, and you shouldn't sacrifice your objectivity for a political goal. That's like if you come in for a sore throat and I want there to be more, I don't know what disease I think would benefit humanity to have. Let's say, I think there'd be more attention to your area if I called it anthrax. And it would certainly get a lot of people's attention if I call your common cold or pneumonia an anthrax. And maybe that's going to get money to the poor area that we're talking about. So some doctor in Alabama might decide to call, the flu anthrax. And certainly they'd get a lot of attention. But that would be wrong, and you don't do that kind of thing. And it obviates, it basically upends the doctor-patient relationship, and doctors need to be objective and reasonable for that individual patient. That's our contract with patients. And our contract's not with society. We're not there to treat society. Maybe the people at the American Public Health Association feel they should be doing that, but that's not your job, and that's not a physician's job. And so we are there more like a car mechanic. We're not there, at any given moment. You bring your car in for new tires or struts or whatever. That's what the car mechanic should do, and he's not there to decide that your car shouldn't be out on the road, and cars of that type all need to be destroyed, or to give you a different diagnosis for your car, because that would be the right thing to do. Maybe he decide that your combustion engine is defunct and you need to buy an electric. Inserting his political views upon the personal professional relationship he has with you as a client with an individual car. And so I don't think the doctor-patient relationship, even though it's humans, not cars, is any necessarily different from that. And so when you have a design in advance, you are basically compromising your medical objectivity. I'm not saying that's the case here, but I think that's a reasonable supposition, because in a sense, you can read this here. Maybe it's a little bit too small, but one of these two doctors, eventually lost the race for unearthing Zika in Brazil, and Zika had never occurred anywhere in the Americas at all, but not for lack of trying. He gave what were basically mild dengue or allergy patients' blood to a friend of his, and implored her, "It's Zika. Find Zika." She couldn't. And didn't. So his mission was preempted by these other doctors who may have been on board with him politically. I don't know, but they were local as well, Bahia, and they wound up finding what they thought was Zika, but they didn't put it through scientific process. They actually leaked the news themselves, and this Dr. Soares Campos justified his action. "We decided to benefit the public more, rather than immediately writing a scientific paper and publishing it." But at the same time, he says in the same interview, Zika is not as dangerous as dengue or chikungunya. The treatment's basically Tylenol. So if there was no public health danger, why did he subvert the scientific process? So I think he's worried. He's thinking he's going to benefit the public more, but ultimately, I mean, we know, I'm not sure the public got benefited by kind of this premature declaration of Zika. But certainly he did. So Dr. Suarez Campos basically got advanced from Bahia to Buenos Aires, which is a more desirable place, and he lists himself on Instagram as the discoverer of the Zika virus in Brazil. So I'm sure he's able to eat out on that. But the data themselves were not that great, and the health ministries pushed back on the original Zika claim that Zika existed as an illness and existed in Brazil, which it never had done either. This story fascinates me because it's kind of, you get to see, maybe open a watch and you see the parts. I think COVID-19 is a bigger thing. It's hard, because we're in the middle of it. It's hard for goldfish to understand the bowl he's in. But if you're outside the bowl, you can kind of look at this, more completely and judge. So, in this case, completely independently, a few months later and a few hours away by car, microcephaly was declared to be epidemic by neuropediatricians in Recife. And this is kind of a similar type thing. They didn't publish this. He didn't publish the Zika thing. Suarez Campos didn't. These doctors didn't publish and call for review or research or anything of that sort. They just kind of went right. They announced it as a problem, even though there were no firm standards of microcephaly, and they had no background data to determine it. But that being said, we're gonna let's stipulate they knew that there was more microcephaly. That doesn't necessarily mean that was an epidemic per se. Usually they had a few cases in a city of metropolitan area, but Recife of 4 million people. You'd expect 4,000 births a day. There are about 15 hospitals. You can do the math. So there's certain number of babies per day in that area, depending on which criteria you use, whether you use Brazil's wrong criteria they had at the time, 2% of babies, that could be 80 babies at any given moment with microcephaly. They were noticing a handful here and there, and then they went and determined that this was a problem, that this was actually an epidemic of microcephaly. I'm going to probably step away from this a little bit because we're probably getting too much in the weeds. But microcephaly itself just means small head, and there's making my head bigger, but it just means small head, and it doesn't necessarily comport with any particular diagnosis. So there are a bunch of non-specific viruses, well, the viruses themselves are not non-specific, but there's no specific causation one-to-one between any of these potential viruses, which might, give you a little bit higher odds of having microcephaly as during pregnancy, but also maybe toxins, drug use, domestic violence, poverty, alcohol, um, you know, so forth and so on. So there was never been any real firm cause. When they saw a few more cases of microcephaly, and they probably saw maybe twice as many for a certain period of time than they were ordinarily seeing, um, whatever it was, there was no reason necessarily to conclude a new cause. But one of the doctors from part one, the in the mission, CHIKV, the mission, happened to be in Recife and got called by the Ministry of Health to look at this microcephaly thing. And I think he had the idea right from the get-go that one caused the other. And then it was really just a matter of kind of fitting his presumption into the data process. And so he did a very incomplete study. He only called the moms of the microcephaly and asked them whether they had any fever, rash, or chills, 6, 8, 9 months prior. And they, a lot of them said yes. So he just assumed they were all Zika. And that could be anything or nothing, because there are lots of causes of rash, fever, chills. So they're big problems. And then he announced, just like the other guy, he had leaked it to the press. They didn't do any scientific studies. And so both the presence of Zika in Brazil and the announcement that Zika brought microcephaly were done through leaking to the press. And so these things became big items, and people just assume them to be the case without any factual basis. And so, what's the take-home message here? Is that you gotta, you have to let these things settle. And because people, and even influential people, have said certain things, doesn't necessarily mean they're right. Anyway, so do I have any, great takeaway lessons or conclusions? Maybe. Let me see if I can zip out of this thing here. Come back to my comic book, and I'll maybe see what we have hopeful there. Did I close it already? Yep. Well, so maybe I'm not going to come. Here it is. So I'm just going to put this comic book back up. Here we go. Number one, step two. Here we go. So they have this conversation in the cafe, and again, it's a little bit wordy because there's a lot of facts that I'm talking about having to be squeezed into these characters, poor little souls. And so let's see. So a lot of interesting cartoons. Sadness of a microcephalic baby. And so they're going to, basically he's going to devote himself to trying to get the truth and get the truth out. So he can't go the mainstream way through his old newspaper. He's going to see what he can do to blog this. There's a little bit of, some people have taken umbrage at my Fauci, kind of monster view. Let me just read it here. The German's Dr. Mengele treated people without illnesses. Dr. Fauci is not quite there, but should treat cautiously for many misuse science for gain. So this has to do with something that's actually going on now that I wrote about in the Washington Examiner last April. Dr. Fauci and the Americans are pushing a human challenge trial on Brazilians. Fortunately, Anvisa, Brazil's FDA, has blocked them. So what they were going to do is inject people with Zika to help find a vaccine. Brazil turned this down. And so what did Dr. Fauci do? He actually brought it to Baltimore. So the NIAID, through Dr. Anna Durbin, is actually injecting and infecting people with Zika, women with Zika, right now in the United States, unless she's already finished. But my understanding is still going on. So that's kind of the Mengele quote. I mean, I think that's extreme. So I said Dr. Fauci is not quite there, but to inject people with Zika when Zika is not around, it's not causing any problems worldwide. It's a little bit like the bivalent vaccine. There's not a good rationale. If Zika is dangerous, then people would be getting sick with it, and you wouldn't have to inject people with it because they'd already be having it, and you'd have a big pool of people from whom you could, make a vaccine and so forth. But because it's gone, they want to make the vaccine, but there's no real need for it. So it's kind of one of these, I don't know if it's a catch-22 or not, but basically, if it were needed, you'd be making it. If you're making it and you can't get anybody, sick enough, whatever, to test on, then maybe you don't need to be making it. Maybe you should take that money and spend it on highways or bridges or solar energy or whatever you want, but not this, because money is not infinite, as we're finding out. So this carries on here. Talking about research and the fact that it's kind of hard once you turn research on to turn it off. So I think, like, for instance, for the American Public Health Association, I think they've probably done very well by COVID. There are a lot of people interested in their theories and their writings and so forth, but it creates its own industry. And I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I do think that things happen, and sometimes people, are moving along, the up escalator while you're going down the down, and they don't want to get off the up escalator, and they don't want to be on your down escalator. So this carries on and on and on. And let's cut to the chase here. So and covering Zika's myths. So he winds up with this interesting book here. It's my comic, my book, and lo and behold, I'm one of the pieces of the puzzle. We're going to fit together and try to figure things out. So I don't know. That's a kind of a little version down, trip down, my memory lane, I guess, and some of my current activities. So you can help things out, in my view, by purchasing and reviewing my book. Go to Amazon. It is being published in Brazil under the Portuguese version of this book. So unless you read Portuguese, I'm not going to be able to help you there. But maybe you can check it out, leave a review, pass it around, tell people about it. And if you have any comments and questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful evening or daytime or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Thank you so much.